Now, for more on minority business ownership in the U.S., I'm joined by Algernon Austin, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Global Policy Solutions. Welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the report from your organization focuses on privately owned businesses. Let's clarify
That's
that.
right.
So what were some of the biggest surprises that came up in your research?
Well, one thing that was quite surprising was the strong growth for women-owned businesses generally, particularly Asian American women-owned businesses. We saw growth in those firms of nearly 40% growth from 2007 to 2012.
And what do you think was behind that? What were some of the factors in that?
Well, there's a growth in the Asian American population generally, but another factor is immigrants are more likely to own businesses than the U.S.-born population. And the Asian American population have a very large share are immigrants, so that's one factor.
Now, there was something very interesting in the report. We're going to have a graphic showing that. It said that if the number of people of color firms were proportional to their distribution in the labor force, people of color would own 1.1 million more businesses with employees, add about 9 million jobs, and about $300 billion in workers' income into the U.S. economy. So what are some of the biggest hurdles preventing that from becoming a reality?
The wealth. You know, there's a saying, it takes money to make money, and you can translate that it takes wealth or capital to have a successful business. Most business owners rely on their own wealth or their family's wealth to start a business. For every dollar of wealth a white household has, an Asian American household has about 80 cents. A Black or a Latino household has about 10 cents. So because of that huge difference in wealth, that's why we see some of the disparities that we see in business ownership.
And what are some of the programs or initiatives in place that are perhaps helping to close that disparity?
Well, there are a number of government programs and nonprofit programs. Unfortunately, the outreach to communities of color is not as good as it should be, and people of color need to do more in terms of finding these organizations and taking advantage of them. That's one thing. And again, you know, we need to think of new ways to get credit, get wealth to these communities so that they can have successful businesses.
And speaking of things that happen to businesses, obviously the 2008 financial crisis took a huge toll on companies. So what were some of the key shifts that you noticed from before the financial crisis to 2012 when the start of the recovery kicked in?
Right. Well, what we saw over that period, you knew there's a housing boom and then a housing bust. Now, white men dominated the construction industry and the construction firms. They owned about 70% of all privately held construction firms. So white men took a big hit. Their numbers are so low because they took such a big hit in the construction industry. We saw about a decline of about 11% in the number of firms. And in terms of the number of jobs, just in the construction industry alone, we saw a decline of about 1 million jobs in terms of firms owned by white men.
Now, one of the other findings showed that nearly all minority entrepreneur groups saw significant growth in the number of their businesses. So what are some of the factors that help drive growth for certain groups? Give us some examples.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, wealth. So we see strong numbers for Asian American men and women because while they have less wealth than the average white household, they have 80 cents. Which is much better than the 10 cents for Blacks and Latinos. So the immigrants are, you know, really strive and move to growing parts of the country. So that's driving the growth that we saw, strong growth for Asian American women, Hispanic men, Asian American men. And I think also for immigrant groups, they can sometimes use ethnic enclaves and other resources that you find in immigrant communities and among particular ethnic groups.
Now let's also look at gender. Your study showed that companies owned by men had higher average sales than women. Is it more so just about gender, or are there other factors we should be paying attention to?
I think it's a lot of it is about gender, because historically, I mean, if you look at the labor market and not at businesses, you see that same gap in terms of pay. You know, men earn more than women, even with the same level of education. I think their sort of access to wealth, access to networks, and other resources that give men an advantage over women in the business world. However, we are seeing strong growth, and we're seeing gaps close. We saw strong growth for women of all groups in my analysis.
Right. Well, definitely something we'll be keeping an eye on, especially as the economy makes its slow recovery. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Algernon Austin, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for Global Policy Solutions.
Pleasure to be here.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.